Caleb met Emily during a community outreach trip overseas. He was helping rebuild homes after a flood, and she was teaching children how to read. They ended up working on the same team, often crossing paths during long days in the sun and evenings filled with shared meals and laughter. Caleb noticed how Emily always stayed behind to help clean up. She wasn't loud or showy, but people listened when she spoke. She asked questions, paid attention, and always tried to make people feel included. Caleb liked that about her. After the project ended, they returned to the United States, but they didn't go their separate ways. They kept in touch, met up often, and supported each other through work and life. Eventually, they moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was quiet, full of plants, books, and the smell of fresh coffee on the weekends. Everything felt steady and good, except for one thing. Emily never introduced Caleb to her family. Whenever holidays came around, she would travel alone. Sometimes she said her parents were too traditional. Other times she said they wouldn't understand her choices. Caleb didn't push. He knew her family lived in a different state, and he trusted that when the time was right, things would change. But years passed, and nothing changed. Emily's parents had never met Caleb. They didn't know about their life together. Not the home they built, not the things they shared, and not even that they had signed official papers at the courthouse one quiet morning. When Caleb asked why she hadn't told them, Emily always gave short answers. "They're just not ready," she'd say. "They wouldn't take it well. You know how they are." Caleb didn't argue. He simply nodded and changed the subject. But deep inside, it hurt. He wasn't angry. He just felt like a secret. He started to notice little things. The way Emily avoided taking pictures together when she sent updates to her parents. The way she always called them from the other room. He wasn't sure if it was about his background or something else she hadn't told him. Still, he waited. He thought time would fix it. He thought patience would help. And Emily, well, she seemed to believe the same. They kept their routines. They worked. They laughed. They made plans for next year and the year after that. But one day, something happened that neither of them could ignore anymore. It started with a single bottle of pills Caleb found tucked away in Emily's bag. He wasn't supposed to see it. And when he did, everything started to change. It was a Sunday afternoon when Caleb noticed the small bottle. It wasn't like him to go through Emily's things, but something about the way the bottle was hidden in the bottom of her bag made him curious. It was a prescription bottle, clearly labeled with her name, but the label had been scratched off in places, making it hard to see the details. He didn't know why it struck him as odd, but it did. He put the bottle back, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. When Emily returned from her trip to the store, Caleb decided to ask her about it. He waited until she had put her things away and sat down with a cup of tea. He didn't want to be intrusive, but the mystery was too much for him to ignore. "Hey, Em," he began, trying to keep his voice calm. "I saw the bottle in your bag. Are you okay?" Emily froze for a moment, and then she sighed, a quiet sound that Caleb could barely hear over the hum of the refrigerator. She set her tea down and looked at him, her face tired, almost strained. "Caleb, there's something I've been meaning to tell you," she said slowly, her eyes avoiding his. "I've been sick for a while now." Caleb felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Sick? How? What happened? She explained that she had been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease months ago. It wasn't something anyone could see, and it was affecting her more than she let on. The doctors had prescribed medication, but even with the pills, she hadn't felt like herself in a long time. There were days when she was too exhausted to get out of bed, or when her joints hurt so much she couldn't move. Caleb listened quietly, not sure what to say. He was shocked, but he didn't want to make her feel worse. He thought back to all the times she had seemed distant, or when she had canceled plans with friends, always with vague excuses. Now, it all made sense. "Why didn't you tell me?" Caleb asked softly, his voice full of concern. Why keep it a secret? Emily's eyes met his, filled with regret. I didn't want to worry you, she said. And honestly, I didn't want to face it myself. I thought if I just ignored it, everything would go back to normal. Caleb nodded, still processing the news. He reached across the table and placed his hand on hers, a silent promise that he would be there for her, no matter what. But deep down, he felt a little hurt that she hadn't trusted him enough to share this with him earlier. You're not alone in this, he said, his voice steady. We'll figure it out together. But even as he said the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The way Emily had kept this hidden from everyone, including her family, made him wonder if there was something even bigger that she was keeping from him. Later that night, as they sat together in silence, Caleb couldn't help but feel the weight of the secret they were both carrying. It wasn't just about the illness anymore. It was about everything that had been left unsaid, the invisible walls that had slowly built up between them. And as the days passed, those walls seemed to grow higher, harder to break down. Something had changed, and Caleb wasn't sure what to do next. A few weeks passed after Emily told Caleb about her illness. At first, things seemed to settle. Caleb made sure to help more around the apartment. He took care of the shopping, cooked meals, and tried to keep things as normal as possible. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to become more withdrawn. She spent longer hours in bed, tired from the medication, or just feeling unwell. Caleb didn't mind. He was used to taking care of things, but something still bothered him. Emily had been so private about the illness, even though they had been living together for years. It wasn't just the illness she hadn't mentioned, it was everything surrounding it. The trips to the doctor, the days she missed work, the late-night calls to her family that always ended quickly, with her changing the subject. It was like she was living in two worlds, the one she shared with Caleb, and the one she kept hidden. One evening, as Caleb sat at the kitchen table, going over some work documents, he heard a strange noise from the living room. He walked out to see Emily standing by the window, looking out at the darkened street. Her hands were trembling, and her face was pale. Caleb felt a pang of worry. He had seen her like this before, weak, lost in her own thoughts. But tonight, something felt different. Emily, Caleb called softly, walking toward her. She turned slowly, as if surprised to see him standing there. Oh, it's nothing, she said quickly, wiping her hands on her pants. Caleb didn't believe her. What's going on? You've been off lately. Emily hesitated before speaking. I don't want to burden you with it. You've already done so much. You don't need to carry this too. Caleb took a deep breath. You're not a burden. We're in this together, remember? You don't have to go through this alone. Emily shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not just the illness. I've been avoiding my family for a while now. And it's not because I'm embarrassed or anything. It's because I know they won't understand. They'll want to help, but they don't know how. And that's just too much. I've been hiding from them, trying to pretend like everything's fine. Caleb stayed silent, watching her. He could tell how much the weight of those words hurt her. Emily wasn't someone who liked to show vulnerability, but in that moment, she was allowing herself to be honest. Why didn't you tell them? They care about you. They would want to know, Caleb said, his voice gentle. I don't think they would. I don't know if they can. I've always been the strong one in the family, the one who has it all together. I don't know how to change that now, Emily replied, her eyes looking down at the floor, ashamed. Caleb stepped closer, putting a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to carry it all on your own. Letting them in might be the hardest thing, but it might also be the thing that makes you feel less alone. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. Caleb could see that Emily was torn between fear and hope. Fear of what her family might think, and hope that maybe, just maybe, they could finally understand. But the truth was, neither of them knew how to take the next step. They were both stuck in the quiet space between what was and what could be. And as the days went by, the silence between them only seemed to grow. It was early one morning when Emily told Caleb that she wanted to visit her family. She had been quiet for days, and Caleb had noticed the change in her behavior. The uncertainty, the nervous energy that seemed to bubble up whenever the topic of her parents came up. Now, standing in the kitchen with her coat in hand, she said it was time. "I think it's time for me to go," Emily said, her voice soft but determined. "I need to tell them. I need them to understand." Caleb hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. He had always been by her side, but this felt different. It wasn't just a visit. It was the beginning of something bigger, a confrontation with the past, with her family, with the secrets that had stayed hidden for so long. "Are you sure?" Caleb asked quietly, his eyes searching hers for any sign of doubt. Emily nodded. "I can't keep avoiding this anymore. I don't want to do it alone. And you're the only one who's been here for me. Will you come with me?" Caleb agreed without hesitation, despite the uncertainty that weighed on both of them. He knew this was something she needed to do. They left the apartment together, the quiet of the early morning surrounding them as they made their way to the car. The drive to her family's house was long, about 3 hours in total, but neither of them said much. It was as if the weight of what was coming kept their words locked away. As the miles passed, Caleb tried to keep his focus on the road, but his mind kept wandering. He thought about how Emily had kept so much from her family, how she had always protected them from the reality of her illness. He wondered if her parents had ever noticed, or if they were too caught up in their own lives to see the truth. Emily sat quietly beside him, staring out the window. Her face was pale, and her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. It was clear that she was nervous, but there was something else in her expression, something like resolve, as though she had made her decision and wasn't turning back now. "I'm scared," Emily said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but Caleb could hear the fear in it. "I know," Caleb replied, "but you're not alone. I'm here." Emily didn't answer right away. She simply nodded and continued to look out the window, the passing scenery reflecting in her eyes. Caleb could feel the weight of the moment, the uncertainty of what would happen when they arrived. They both knew that once they crossed that threshold, everything would change. There would be no going back. As they neared the house, the trees lining the driveway began to thin, and the familiar sight of her family's property came into view. The large house stood in the distance, its windows dark, as if it were waiting for them. Caleb could see the tension in Emily's shoulders, the way she gripped the door handle, as if it would give her some comfort. "You don't have to do this," Caleb said gently. "If you're not ready, we can turn around." But Emily shook her head. "No, I have to do this." They pulled into the driveway and parked, the quiet of the morning wrapping around them like a blanket. Caleb turned off the engine, but neither of them moved. The house loomed ahead, and for a moment, neither of them knew what to say. This was the moment of truth. The silence in the car felt heavy as Caleb and Emily sat parked in the driveway, staring at the house in front of them. Emily had never introduced him to her family before, and now, in this moment, it was as though everything they had kept hidden for so long was about to be exposed. Caleb could feel his heart beating a little faster, but he stayed calm, trying to offer Emily some comfort. "You ready?" Caleb asked, glancing over at her. Emily took a deep breath, her hands still gripping the door handle. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, but I don't have a choice, do I?" "No," Caleb said softly, "but you're not doing it alone." Slowly, Emily opened the door, and they both stepped out into the cold morning air. Caleb followed her as she walked toward the front door, her steps unsure but determined. The house looked as grand as he remembered from the few times she had mentioned it. Large windows, tall pillars, and a well-maintained lawn. It seemed to represent everything her family stood for: tradition, pride, and order. When they reached the door, Emily hesitated before knocking. Caleb could see the nervous tension in her shoulders as she took one more deep breath. And then, The door opened. Her mother stood there, dressed in a simple sweater and slacks, her expression unreadable. She didn't smile, didn't say anything at first, just looked at Emily for a moment before her gaze shifted to Caleb. It wasn't the warm welcome that Caleb had imagined. It was a cold stare that seemed to ask, "Who are you? And why are you here?" "Hi, Mom," Emily said, her voice quieter than usual. Her mother didn't say anything at first, just stepped aside and motioned for them to come in. "You're here," she said, her tone flat, almost distant. Caleb followed Emily inside, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. The house was as large as it looked from the outside, filled with old furniture and the smell of fresh coffee. It felt like a place frozen in time, where everything had its place and nothing ever changed. Her father appeared soon after, his eyes narrowing slightly when he saw Caleb standing beside Emily. It was clear from the way he looked at him that he wasn't pleased to see someone who didn't fit the image of what he had in mind for his daughter. "This is Caleb," Emily said quietly, glancing at her parents. "My husband." The words hung in the air, heavy and awkward. Her father didn't react right away. He simply nodded stiffly, and her mother gave a small, almost imperceptible sigh before turning to walk into the kitchen. Caleb stood there, unsure of what to do. He had always imagined this moment would be different. He thought they might at least try to make him feel welcome. But instead, he felt like an outsider in his own right. The silence stretched on, and Caleb could feel the tension building. It was clear that there was so much left unsaid between them all. Emily's family hadn't even greeted her properly, let alone acknowledged the years she had spent keeping them apart from Caleb. And in that moment, Caleb realized that this wasn't just about meeting her family. It was about breaking down walls that had been built over years of silence and hidden truths. Emily had spent so long keeping everything from them. And now, here they were, all facing the uncomfortable reality of what had been kept in the dark. "Let's sit down," Emily said, her voice more steady now. "We have a lot to talk about." And with that, they all moved to the living room, where the real conversation would finally begin. The living room was quiet as Emily, Caleb, and her parents settled into their seats. The space was formal, with antique furniture and family portraits on the walls. It felt like a room frozen in time, full of expectations and unspoken rules. Emily sat on one end of the room, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Caleb sat beside her, trying to stay calm but feeling the weight of the moment. Her parents sat across from them, both looking at Emily as though they were waiting for her to speak. Her father's expression was stern, his eyes narrow, while her mother seemed more resigned, as though she had already accepted whatever was coming. "So, Emily," her father began, his voice sharp but controlled, "why are you here? After all this time, you just show up out of nowhere." With him. Caleb felt the tension rise in the room, but he didn't say anything. This wasn't about him. This was about Emily and the family she had kept him from for so long. Emily swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I've been hiding things from you, from both of you, and it's time I stop. I want you to know the truth." Her mother's eyes softened slightly, but her father remained unmoved. "The truth about what?" he asked, his tone still cold. Emily took a deep breath, gathering the strength to continue. "I've been sick, for a long time, and I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to worry." There was a long pause before her father spoke again. "So, this is why you've been distant all these years, why you've kept us at arm's length." Emily nodded slowly. "Yes. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know if you'd understand." Her mother's face was now filled with concern, but her father still looked confused. "Why not? Why didn't you trust us enough to tell us? We're your family." Emily looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I didn't think you would understand. You've always had your own expectations for me. I've always tried to meet them, but I couldn't anymore. Not with everything that was happening." Caleb watched the exchange closely. He could see the pain in Emily's eyes, the weight of years of silence and secrets that had built up between her and her family. This wasn't just about her illness. It was about all the unspoken things she had carried on her own, afraid of disappointing her parents. Her father's gaze softened for a brief moment, but then his expression hardened again. "So, what do you expect us to do now? Just accept all of this?" "I don't expect anything," Emily replied, her voice gaining strength. "I just want you to know the truth. I can't keep hiding anymore. I can't pretend like everything is fine when it isn't." Caleb could feel the shift in the room. The tension was still there, but something had changed. Emily had spoken her truth, and now it was up to her family to decide how they would respond. Her mother looked at her father, then back at Emily. "We may not fully understand, but we're your family, and we'll figure this out together." There was a long silence as everyone took in her words. Emily's father remained quiet, his expression unreadable, but Caleb could see the shift in him. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of a new chapter for Emily and her family. Caleb turned to Emily, his gaze meeting hers. She looked relieved, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. They didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in years, Emily had spoken the truth. And that, at least, was a start. The silence in the room was thick after Emily's words. Her mother sat back in her chair, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and concern. Her father, however, still seemed distant, his arms crossed tightly across his chest, as if he were guarding himself from something. For a long moment, no one spoke. Caleb could feel the weight of the unspoken questions in the air. What would happen now? Would Emily's parents accept what she had shared, or would they push her away? Finally, her father spoke, his voice quieter than before. "I didn't know you were struggling this much. You never let us in. We thought you had it all together. You always seemed like the strong one." Emily looked down, her eyes filled with both regret and relief. "I thought if I pretended to be strong, everything would be okay. But it wasn't. I should have told you. I should have trusted you." Her mother sighed, leaning forward slightly. "We didn't know, Emily. We didn't understand. But we do now." Caleb watched the interaction closely, understanding that this was a breakthrough, but it didn't mean everything was fixed. The years of silence couldn't be undone in a single conversation. Still, it was a start, a small step toward something better. "I just don't want you to be disappointed in me," Emily continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I've kept so much from you. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would look at me differently." Her mother reached across the table and took her hand, offering a small but comforting smile. "Emily, we don't want you to feel like you have to hide. We love you, no matter what." Her father, after a moment of hesitation, nodded. "We're your family. We may not understand everything, but we'll try. We don't want you to go through this alone." It was a simple statement, but it felt like a weight had been lifted from Emily's shoulders. The years of keeping her illness hidden, the fear of disappointing her family, all seemed to fade away in that moment. Caleb could see the change in Emily's face. The tension that had gripped her for so long had begun to ease. For the first time, it felt like she was truly seen, truly heard by the people who had always been a part of her life. As the conversation continued, Caleb remained mostly quiet, allowing Emily to lead the way. It was her story to tell, her family to rebuild the connection with. He could see how hard this was for her, but also how much she needed it. The honesty, the vulnerability. It wasn't easy for Emily, but it was necessary. "I think it's going to take time," Emily said after a while, her voice steady now. "But I'm willing to try. I just don't want to hide anymore." Her father, for the first time in the entire conversation, softened. "We'll give you the time you need. We're not going anywhere." Caleb smiled faintly, glad to see the shift, though he knew this was only the beginning. There would still be moments of discomfort, of misunderstanding. But for Emily, this was the first step toward healing. For her family, it was a chance to learn how to support her in a way they hadn't before. As they sat there, Talking more openly than they ever had, Caleb felt a quiet sense of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for Emily, it would be a little less lonely. The days after that difficult conversation felt different for Emily. Though the weight of everything didn't suddenly disappear, she felt lighter. It wasn't as though her relationship with her parents was fully healed, but there had been a shift. They were starting to understand her better, and she was beginning to understand them in a new way too. Her father, who had once seemed so distant, had begun to make small gestures of kindness. He'd called her to check on her more often, asking how she was feeling, not just about her illness, but about her life. Her mother, ever the quiet one, had started making little changes, like bringing her favorite foods when she visited or asking if there was anything she needed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy. But Emily had realized that family wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, being there, and trying to do better every day. Caleb had been by her side the entire time, offering quiet support when she needed it and space when she didn't. He had never pushed her to speak to her parents, but when she had finally done it, he felt a deep sense of pride for her. It had taken incredible strength for her to face the fear of rejection, and even though the road ahead was still uncertain, she had taken the first step. One afternoon, Emily sat in the kitchen with her mother, talking about the old days. It was a small moment, but it felt huge. They were laughing about something silly that had happened when Emily was younger, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she was truly seen, not just as someone who was sick, but as a daughter, a person, someone worth listening to. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Emily and Caleb sat on the porch of her parents' house. The warm breeze ruffled their hair, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Emily felt at peace. "Do you think they'll keep trying?" Emily asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Will it last?" Caleb smiled softly, his eyes full of understanding. "They've started, haven't they? It's not going to be easy, but they're trying. And that's what matters." Emily nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the porch railing. "Yeah, I just hope we can keep moving forward, even if it's just one step at a time." "You've come a long way already," Caleb said, his voice steady. "And you don't have to do it alone." Emily looked at him, her heart filled with gratitude. "Thank you. For being here. For everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon. There was still much to figure out, still so many unanswered questions. But for the first time, Emily felt like the path ahead wasn't as daunting as it once had been. With Caleb by her side, and with her family slowly starting to understand her, there was hope for a future that didn't feel so lonely. It wasn't going to be easy, but Emily knew now that she didn't have to hide anymore. She had taken the first step toward healing, and whatever came next, she would face it with the support of those who cared about her. And that made all the difference.